Hi, I'm Ryan Johnson, and today we will be talking about the exploration of the timeline of the space race. The space race was a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was during the time of the Cold War. This race started because there was tension between the countries already. The space race started in the late 1950s. The first country to launch an artificial satellite into space was the Soviet Union. The name of the satellite was Sputnik. This was bad because the Soviets launched Sputnik with an R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile, and so far they were winning the space race. The U.S. launched its own satellite in 1958. The satellite's name was Explorer 1. The satellite was made by Wernher von Braun. In that same year, President Dwight Eisenhower signed a public order that made the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or you could just call it NASA. This was a government agency dedicated to the exploration of space. In 1959, the Soviets launched a probe to hit the moon. The Soviets named this probe Luna 2. This was the first probe to hit the moon. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin was the first Soviet to orbit the Earth. Yuri traveled in a capsule-like spacecraft named Vostok 1. Later, the U.S. made a smaller spacecraft that was cone-shaped. The name of this spacecraft was called Mercury. Tested Mercury with chimpanzees. NASA held the final test flight in March 1961. This took place before Gagarin launched in the Vostok 1. Later in May, John F. Kennedy made a public claim that we would put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. John Glenn became the first man from America to orbit the Earth in February 1962. NASA's budget was increased just about 500%. And the lunar landing program involved 34,000 employees that worked at NASA. NASA also added 375,000 employees of industrial and university contractors. In January 1967, a flight simulator caught on fire, causing 3 astronauts to die. After the event, the U.S. suffered a major setback in the space race. The Soviets' lunar landing program went on as planned. In December, NASA had its first manned aircraft to go to the moon. On July 16, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Edwin, or Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins launched in Apollo 11. This was the first attempt to land on the moon. The Apollo 11 landed on the moon 4 days later on July 20th. Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon after it landed. After Neil Armstrong took the first step onto the moon, he said his famous quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." After Apollo 11, the U.S. won the space race.